Antonio Brown is a Raider. He's a Raider. As we told you, this was likely to be the case after he said LOL to Buffalo. All right, they tried to send him to football Siberia. Instead, they sent him to the Raiders. And what happens when there is a huge deal is every agent, every pro player, former player, pro meaning pro for the player's media member, all says, this is the new way of doing business in the National Football League. In fact, Randy Moss, who of course quit on the Oakland Raiders previously, said, I'll tell you this, you're an elite player in the National Football League. I think, yes, this is the approach. This is the page you can take out of Antonio Brown's book. Stay aggressive, be aggressive. In other words, don't show up at work for week 17 when your team's playing for a playoff bid. By the way, I just want to point out, okay, that we can say all we want about Randy Moss, and he was an incredible talent. But when you empower people like a Randy Moss, who was anti-media the entire time he played in the NFL. Okay? Fought the media, didn't want to handle the media. It doesn't matter what he was as a player. And then you give him the power of a now ESPN microphone. This is what happens. You might say, Randy Moss just keeping it real. Okay, but look, the Raiders have empowered a guy who quit on his football team. And if you think that this is the comp, you don't know how real estate works. Okay? How many of you, John hasn't bought a house. Last time he bought a house was the last time he flew, right? Which is like 20 years ago.
That's correct.
Right? Ryan Music's never purchased a house. Dan Byers bought a house. I know this because I've purchased 7 houses in the last 12, 13 years. And no, I'm not some house flipper. I'm just an idiot with real estate. But I do know this about real estate. It's called comps. And you don't simply take the one top level comp and go like, there you go. Look, that's what realtors try and do. That's what sellers try and do. And the buyer tries to take the bottom comp. And I'm not sure if it's the median or the mean, but basically you take out the top, you take out the bottom, and the meat. That's what it is. 5 comps or so. Same neighborhood, same square footage. Lot location does in fact matter. And what happens with comps is we get far afield from the old real estate saying, which is there are 3 things that matter in real estate. 3 things. Ryan Music, you familiar with those 3 things?
I do believe I know those 3 things, Doug. They would be number 1, location. Number 2 would in fact be location. And the last and most important one would be location.
Correct. Location, location, location. Which is what the Antonio Brown thing is about. Look, you can tell me that it's about elite players and pushing themselves to finally find their own destination. You can tell me that because Antonio Brown wouldn't go to Buffalo, that should empower people to not want to be traded to locations that they don't desire. And there is some truth to that. It's why, and we'll get to this later, anyone mentioning LeBron James potentially being traded to the Lakers is not dealing with the reality of life, which is he just moved to Los Angeles. His kids are enrolled in school here. He's not moving anywhere else because if you trade him, he's simply not going to show up because he's LeBron James. But the reason the Antonio Brown thing works is location, location, location. Not specific to Oakland, but the Raiders have John Gruden, who shed a bunch of salary. The Raiders are moving to Vegas, which will fill up their coffers, which are completely depleted now. Because he is playing in Pittsburgh, an old school traditional organization that is done. They're done with the Le'Veon Bells, done with the Antonio Browns, done with their egos. Goodbye. We will bite the bullet and take $21 million in cap hit and just take a 3rd and a 5th and say goodbye to you. The reason there wasn't a big trade market for him was because there just aren't other places that want to pay him, he wanted to go to, that had the cap space and had the cash. And the reason this hasn't happened more often is there aren't that many NFL teams that are going to bite the bullet and take a $21 million cap hit. They're just not out there. So you can tell me this is a comp and all football players should stand up for themselves. But okay, good luck to you. Antonio Brown was coming into the non-guaranteed part of his contract. Antonio Brown was playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Antonio Brown is, in fact, an elite wide receiver. The Oakland Raiders had, in fact, traded away their best wide receiver. They did, in fact, have a bunch of cap room. They did have John Gruden, who has a long-term contract where he would say, okay, we'll take a shot on this guy. And oh, yeah, by the way, Oakland has a both present day and long-term history of ridiculously overpaying guys. Go back to Nnamdi Asomugha, who they remarkably overpaid, or Trent Brown, who they just overpaid to be their left tackle, who they signed as a free agent out of New England. You can tell me this is a comp, and I can tell you, no, it's not. It's an outlier. If not for the rule, you wouldn't have the exception. This is the exception to the rule. And so if Randy Moss is going to encourage all football players should stand up for themselves and demand where they want to play football, good luck to you, dude, because that ain't the way it works. I've seen idiots who cover the sport like Mike Freeman tweet out, Justin Houston, where's the loyalty? They cut him to save $15 million. Like, yeah, but they didn't cut him when he had guaranteed money in his contract and he played 5 games and made $23 million in 2016. It's not loyalty. It's a business. Football teams are running a business. There's a certain amount of cap money you can spend. There's a certain amount of cash that you have. It's like NFL GM saves money on Justin Houston, right? They save $15 million. It's not like they sit there and go like, ooh, we save $15 million. Let's all stuff our pockets with cash. Let's throw a super sweet party. Fellas, let's go down to the Monarch Bay Resort, Dana Point. Let's go crazy, right? Let's go down to that little day spa that got Robert Kraft in trouble. Everybody get themselves a massage. Like, that ain't the way it works. You got a certain amount of money you can spend. And the Raiders are sitting there going like, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to clear up a bunch of this cap space. Now we're going to pay a bunch of money to a receiver. We got a bunch of money in a quarterback and a bunch of money in a left tackle. And now we have a bunch of draft picks, and we're going to probably draft all defense with the draft picks. They had no more cash left to spend on Antonio Brown. Why? Because it's a business. This is the way businesses are run. And in business, occasionally, you overpay for something that wasn't previously yours. Happens in my business, happens in your business. You want to steal the guy away like Trent Brown? You got to overpay him. Which also makes the Antonio Brown thing a little bit curious because they didn't actually have to overpay him. Like, where was he going to go? But it's a front-loaded deal, $30 million in guarantee. For 2 years, he'll be super productive, but I don't believe it completely changed the landscape of wide receivers or of the NFL with star players demanding where they're going to play next year. It's an outlier. It's an exception. The rule is generally you make it work, sign a long-term deal, probably a little bit less to stay home than it is to go out on the free agent market. And if they really want to keep you, they franchise tag you, which they can do for 2 years before they put the transitional tag on. Right? Everybody thought Kirk Cousins changed the game, right? Kirk Cousins changed the game. Fully guaranteed contract. Antonio Brown just signed a contract. It is a new deal. There is $30 million in new money, which, by the way, was what he was going to make if he stayed in Pittsburgh for 2 years. It's just guaranteed. That's all it is. Which is what he said he demanded and what he actually got. But have you seen another quarterback sign a Kirk Cousins contract? Here's the point about Kirk Cousins. And look, I'm the defender of Kirk Cousins' contract from the Minnesota Vikings perspective. There weren't better options out there. They didn't actually exist. And he wasn't actually the highest bidder. But so far, has the Kirk Cousins deal worked out for the Vikings? That would be a no. Which is why nobody's going to say, hey, let's top the Kirk Cousins deal. Which is a lot like when Nnamdi Asomugha signed with the Raiders for $16 million to play cornerback. Did that work out? No, which is why it's not a comp. It's an outlier deal, which is what the Antonio Brown deal is as well. Now, I will defend John Gruden from this perspective. Who's better, Amari Cooper or Antonio Brown? It ain't close. There isn't a single person in a front office in the National Football League that would tell you Amari Cooper is even in the class of Antonio Brown. Now, he's not a pain in the ass like Antonio Brown. He didn't dye his mustache yellow, okay? He doesn't have the hair going crazy. He doesn't no-show on his team week 17. All of that is fair. But I'm talking about lining up on a Sunday out wide. Who would you rather have, Antonio Brown or Amari Cooper? Come on, really? Right? Not even a comp. They're not even the same discussion. Amari Cooper's a nice player who they would have been on the hook to pay $14 million or had to renegotiate a long-term deal with. So, John Gruden to all the naysayers, he traded away all our talent. No, he's not. He's getting rid of the guys he doesn't want and bringing in the guys he does. And then he's going to reload the defense, including defensive end, with the first-round draft picks that he has. 5 over the next 2 years. I don't love the message the Antonio Brown thing says. I think it goes counter to what Mike Mayock said at the NFL Combine. We're trying to change the culture. Really? That changes the culture? For the worse. But as football players, they got better at left tackle. They got better at wide receiver. And while they may not get a Khalil Mack in the draft, overall, they're going to be much better off because they're going to have a smorgasbord of young players running around on the defensive side of the football. And they've been a bad defense for years, even when they went to the playoffs, even when they had Khalil Mack. But please stop telling me that this exception is the rule. It is the exception, not the rule.